Russia. For us Estonians, it seems like there has always been a large, dangerous and foreign empire right next to us. But did you know that the most indigenous inhabitants of this land are Finno-Ugric peoples, closely related to us? Somehow they are always forgotten when talking about Russian history. But in this video we will go through the entire history of Russia from the perspective of the Finno-Ugric people. Most of the Finno-Ugric nations live in today's Russian Federation. There reside part of the Karelians and Sami, as well as the Votes, Izorians, Webs, Komi, Udmurts, Mari, Urzias, Mokshas, Khanty and Mansi. Russian history usually starts with a story from the old Russian primary chronicle, Tale of Bygone Years. In the 9th century, such tribes as the Jutes, Slovenes, Muria, Webs and Kriviks inhabited today's northwestern Russia. They couldn't get along, fought and warred until finally they were like, listen, we can't go on like this. Let's call someone to rule over us. And everyone was like, fine. Then they invited a man from Scandinavia named Rurik, who was like, can't you put a country together? I'll help. Actually, we're not entirely sure if such a person ever existed, but if he did, he was probably just a Viking chieftain who came to Novgorod with his warrior mafia and started controlling the trade route from the Baltic Sea through Novgorod to the Arabian lands. Anyway, Rurik is considered the first ruler of Russia. Basically, he was the first domino piece here. Here is Ivan the Terrible's terror, Stalin and tens of millions in labor camps, Putin and possible nuclear war. But now wait, who's this here? Who invited Rurik? Well, the Jutes, they were essentially Votes and perhaps Setos. The Muria, they were one of the now extinct Finno-Ugric nations. And the Webs were the Webs. So 3 out of 5 tribes that founded the Russian state were Finno-Ugric. Darn, didn't see that coming. Anyway, Rurik's descendants also conquered Kiev, which became the Kievan Rus. Then Prince Vladimir adopted Orthodox Christianity from Byzantium. Then after some time the other principalities stopped listening to Kiev and the state fragmented, but somehow they still had fun together and it was the golden age of Kievan Rus. From this period come many old Russian heroic songs or balinas. They tell of heroes' battles against steppe peoples. But who were those heroes? Well, the most famous of them, Ilya Muromets. Actually, the name Muromets means from Murom, so Ilya from Murom. But who were the Muromians? Well, another extinct Finno-Ugric nation. They lived between today's Moscow and Nizhny Novgorod, where there is still the city of Murom. As for Moscow, by the 12th century, Kiev was one of Europe's largest and most powerful cities. But where Moscow was, there was just a forest. But that began to change. Officially, Moscow was founded in 1147. Initially a small wooden walled town, a completely insignificant place. It wasn't even the center of a principality, but it began to slowly grow and become more important. But who do you think lived in the Moscow area at that time? Yep, the Finno-Ugric people, specifically the Muria and Muromians. But soon the Finno-Ugric people disappeared from that area. Where to, you might ask? Well, already in Rurik's time, some Slavic tribes had reached what is now Russia. The Slavs are those who speak Slavic languages, the ancestors of today's Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Serbs, Bulgarians, and so on. Their original homeland was somewhere between Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, from where they began to spread everywhere. And the East Slavs moved north along the great rivers to areas where other peoples, including the Finno-Ugric, previously lived. In the early days of Kievan Rus, they lived mainly in cities along the large rivers, but from there their settlement gradually spread, and in many places the Finno-Ugric people slowly assimilated into them, adopting the East Slavic language and culture. This process began even before the creation of the Kievan Rus and continues to this day, with smaller Finno-Ugric peoples gradually merging into the Russian population. However, the golden age of Kievan Rus ended in the 13th century, when the Mongol hordes overran the Russian principalities. In 1240, they devastated Kiev. This began the period the Russians called the Mongol-Tatar yoke. Some principalities, including Kiev, soon fell under the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but Moscow remained under the Mongols. The Mongols didn't bother too much with governing the Russian principalities. They just demanded, pay us a tax once a year and then we won't beat you. And then Moscow was like, listen, collecting this tax is troublesome. You have better things to do. How about I collect the tax for you and bring it to you? Maybe even beat those guys up. The Mongols thought, yeah, hey, pretty good idea. No, it wasn't, because Moscow used this to its advantage, quietly absorbed other principalities, and then drove the Mongols away, and it began to expand more and more. First, it conquered the Novgorod and Pskov principalities, where many Finno-Ugric peoples lived: the Votes, Isaurians, Karelians, Veps, Komi. Then the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, thus incorporating the Mari, Mordvins and Udmurts into Russia. But should you stop there? At that time, the hottest commodity with which Moscow could trade with the rest of the world was fur. And Moscow's ruler, Ivan the Terrible, thought, Siberian taiga, so many fur-bearing animals, so much wealth. But what? It's not an empty area. There's the Siberian Khanate and there live some peoples like Khanty and Mansi. Doesn't matter, we'll conquer it anyway. So Moscow state eventually expanded all the way to the Pacific Ocean. In the late 17th century, Peter the Great became the Tsar of Russia, Europe's #1 fan. Wanting to make Russia a European-like country, and for this he established a new capital, St. Petersburg. Architects were invited from Italy, magnificent palaces were built, surrounded by canals, and the city was called the Venice of the North. But wait, who built it and what was there before? The city was established on a swampy delta of the Neva River, which was the land of the Votes and the Isaurians. Of course, they were sensible people and had enough sense not to live in a disgusting swampy mire in the middle of a mosquito infestation. But Peter really needed to build a city right there, which meant that simply tens of thousands of peasants from the surrounding areas and elsewhere were driven to drain the swamp with shovels and even bare hands. No one really knows how many of them died there from diseases and exhaustion or drowned. Well, but at least the Tsar got his magnificent city. In the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, all Finno-Ugric peoples except for the Hungarians, some Sami and some Finns were under the rule of the Russian Tsar. Finland and Estonia were the first to be influenced by the European national movements. The idea was something like, we could develop our own language culture and maybe one day we can create an independent state. Well, Russia had different thoughts. Especially at the end of the 19th century, Russian rulers started thinking, why do we have so many different peoples in this empire? Why aren't you all Russians? It would be so much easier. This started the process known as Russification, aimed at assimilating small peoples into the Russian population. Fortunately, World War I happened where Russia proved weak, was defeated by Germany and eventually fell into a civil war between Reds and Whites. Finland and Estonia took the opportunity and declared independence. Other Finno-Ugric peoples were not so lucky, as they fell under the new formation, the Soviet Union, and they remain without an independent state to this day. We do not know how long the story of the Finno-Ugric peoples in Russia will last, but it is feared that it has a sad ending. And that wraps up today's video. If you appreciate our content, please support us by subscribing and giving the video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you soon!